Have you ever felt like you were out of control? Or have you ever wondered why you were doing things and couldn't stop? I don't mean that you maybe felt out of your own body. I meant you were in a fight with your partner and you couldn't stop yourself from saying those things that were hurtful or from reacting badly to them and pulling away at a moment when you actually wanted to lean in. If your behaviors have ever felt a little bit outside of your own control and you ever wondered why, or you were just frustrated and couldn't figure out how to make that switch, this is the episode for you. I brought on Dr. Alex Curmi, who's going to help us today understand more about compulsive behaviors, those reactions that we have that are so destructive in our relationships, and maybe how to change these patterns for good. Alex, welcome to the show, and I'm glad you're here. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Can you tell the audience just a little bit about your background? Because I know it's impressive.
Yeah, so I originally trained as a medical doctor. I'm from Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean, and after university, did my medical training initially in Scotland, training in sort of the various specialties like general medicine, surgery, and a bit of psychiatry. Then I started training at the Maudsley Hospital in psychiatry back in 2016. And there's a lot that I love about psychiatry. I love dealing with some of the darker aspects of human nature and figuring out, thinking about why people behave the way they do, what makes them tick, and helping people with their problems. At the same time, when I started training as a psychiatrist, I felt there was something a little bit missing. I felt that I wanted to deal with the psychological aspects as well, the social aspects. And so then halfway through that, I started training as a psychotherapist in parallel. And then I also started a once a week podcast called the Thinking Mind podcast. And really, that's because I felt like I was having all of these conversations at the intersections of these different disciplines: psychiatry, psychology, sociology. But also, I was thinking about spirituality and philosophy, how all of these could tie into what makes a good life, how we can help people with their mental health, things along those lines. And so the podcast was a way of consolidating this and helping me to have conversations that can hopefully bring together some of these very different disciplines, and also helps me to have a bit of a conversation with an audience, so that as I'm having these ideas, I can test them out and see what people respond to and see what really helps people. So that's a bit about my background.
I love this because it mirrors a lot of my own background of getting into psychology and sensing that there was something so much deeper. You and I both had that sense. And I wonder if a lot of our colleagues have a sense that they're not telling us something. I saw recently, even the US government is now starting to talk about how our medical system and the medical model we use for mental health is no longer really appropriate. How a lot of the chemical basis of depression, for example, is not really holding up now that we have real science going on. And we're looking at what is causing depression. Turns out it's not just serotonin levels. There's actually a lot more happening there. Attachment issues, relationships, lifestyle, diet, everything is impacting this more than we ever thought before. I think we oversimplified so hard that we started just throwing drugs at problems and wishing it would go away, and it doesn't. So I'm glad that there's people like you here in the field that are working on this, and a doctor who then comes back to become a therapist is a very interesting difference. Most people go the other direction, therapist into the higher level. That's fascinating. You have all of those spaces to look at. There was a piece of content on your wonderful, wonderful podcast Instagram account recently that I looked at, and I've been on your podcast. It's excellent. I recommend it. There was a great post about Freud and compulsive behaviors and those responses. And I would love for you to break that down for the audience here, because so many of them feel like they don't understand necessarily why they feel pushed into responses, trauma responses, all kind of behavior responses. They don't understand why they can't stop. Can you enlighten us about that reel and about Freud?
Yeah, I think the first thing to mention on this point is that, of course, most of our behavior is dictated by unconscious impulses. And initially, when you hear that, you might think that's a bad thing. Why are most of my decisions unconscious? There's a good reason, which is we do so much. We indeed have to make so many decisions throughout our days and throughout our weeks that it wouldn't make sense cognitively to be very expensive to have to consciously consider every decision we make. So if the listener were to reflect on their day, what they would probably find is most of the things they do because they're automatic. So they probably brush their teeth, they engage in some sort of work, they know what kind of entertainment they're going to fall back on. At the end of the day, they most of the words they say have an automatic quality to them.
And this
And
is this is a great point, because a child who's learning to walk, yes, they're manually learning to walk, but eventually you don't think about the placement of every toe and bending and flexing every ankle point, and you don't think about the continuous movements. Those become automatic, those become unconscious. You're breathing, you're blinking. This is unconscious usually, except for right now. You're probably cursing me thinking, oh, now I'm thinking about my blinking. Well, yes, you're aware of it for a moment, and then your system takes over again. The more that we get used to things and they become habit, they become largely unconscious. Part of the problem, though, is that the unconscious mind can also learn bad patterns. I think that's what you're about to say.
absolutely. So most of what we learn and do is unconscious. And so then the next question would be, why do people continue doing things which hurt them? And generally, that's why people come to therapy. They find that they keep making the same mistakes over and over again, or I keep landing in a situation with the same theme over and over again. For example, I find myself always abandoned, or always find myself reverting to alcohol and drugs, and so on. And usually the reason is, if you've learned a behavior, if you've done a behavior long enough so that it becomes instantiated unconsciously and becomes part of your repertoire, it's because it has some kind of benefit. It's very rare that you learn a behavior that's totally destructive. So, for example, someone might develop a drinking problem because it helps them deal with their negative emotions. There is a plus there. Thinking about relationships, someone might be avoidant because it helps them to protect themselves from emotional pain. It's kind of a preemptive strike. As you know, you're the attachment specialist, but someone with an avoidant attachment, they keep themselves held back to avoid becoming vulnerable. Someone with an anxious attachment, they long for closeness because for them, the core pain that they're trying to avoid is a feeling of isolation, and they feel like if they're by themselves, they're somehow not enough. So, usually, if someone is suffering with a dysfunctional behavior, it's because it has a certain quality, like a protective quality to it. And so, behavior change isn't a straightforward process. What it involves is really looking at these unconscious processes, how they might be influenced by things like beliefs you hold, typically beliefs about yourself or the world or other people, um, and then working really hard over a decently long time period to try and write in new behaviors. And what makes the new behavior beneficial is it's going to be a more sophisticated, more elegant solution to that problem. So, for example, if you want to deal with your negative emotions, doing mindfulness meditation or going to the gym are more elegant solutions to that problem, because not only do they solve the problem, but they come with a lot of other benefits, as opposed to alcohol, which, yes, solves the problem arguably faster and easier, but then comes with a whole host of side effects. When it comes to relationships, an avoidant person, for instance, slowly learning to become more vulnerable, and indeed, perhaps at the deepest level, becoming at ease with the fact that they may be rejected and may suffer some emotional pain, is a much more sophisticated solution to this problem of the possibility of emotional pain than simply sort of holding oneself back and running away, because then that means you don't get to be in relationships at all. And as most people, I think, come to discover at some point, not being in a relationship at all isn't a very good life strategy.
Very lonely is what
Very
it usually
lonely.
ends up. Those people come to me when they're 45, 50 and say, Adam, I don't know if I can have a family now, but I sure would like somebody. Can you
Mm.
please stop me from nail my feet to the ground so I can't run away from women anymore? Is usually what the kind of emotion is. Let's talk a little bit about that flip from how can a person become more aware of their unconscious mind. I remember back in school taking Psychology 101 for the first time. I was a tiny, young little dude, no beard at all, and learning they splashed the big picture up on the board of the iceberg, and the conscious mind was above water and the unconscious mind was below water, and that's it's almost a helpful beginning image of your conscious and unconscious. But how can people become more aware of their unconscious mind and where it is driving them in negative ways? Because so many people blame themselves and say, why did I do that? or they say, I have no idea what I'm thinking or why I'm doing these things, and it's impossible, seemingly, for them to reach that point.
That's a great question. So I think when it comes to discovering more about your unconscious, the meta skill that applies here is free association. So, of course, Freud was the first person to talk about free association, and he used it in his psychoanalytic practice. But free association, I would argue now, is a part of most kinds of psychotherapy and arguably some coaching and counseling as well. And essentially, what free association is learning to express yourself without it needing to make sense, without it needing to be rational, expressing yourself in an associative, spontaneous way, and literally letting the stream of consciousness flow out of you, going from one idea to the next, without forcing your judgments on it, without worrying about how it's going to be received by yourself or by the listener. This is a very difficult skill, but I think personally, while training as a therapist, I think it's one of the most valuable skills that I have learned and I'm continuing to learn.
Now, I know that Freud, a lot of his earlier clients were women, and I think he harnessed something that is very natural to women. Women intuitively do a lot of free association when they talk with somebody they trust, when they confide in a friend, when they talk over tea, or they talk while somebody's holding their hand to get through a difficult time. They process out loud and they actually learn how they feel out loud. And this is the way that women sort out their unconscious mind from their conscious mind. It's a lot harder for men to do this, I think. We don't do it. We resist it, in fact, because it sounds weak, it sounds disorganized, and it also seems to serve no purpose. But it
I think
does serve a
that's
deeper
that last
purpose.
one is the key. I think men tend to have a strong need for something to have a clear point or a purpose. And I agree with you. I generally find that it's harder for men to free associate. And probably this is why women on average tend to be a little bit more emotionally intelligent than men. But that being the case, I think that's why if you are a man listening to this, this is a huge opportunity for you, because if you're a man who can learn to free associate, you're going to put yourself ahead of most men, I would argue. And free association isn't just useful about finding out things about your unconscious, like your beliefs and what drives you, etc. But I would argue free association is excellent for social skills. It's actually excellent for getting to know people, the ability to express yourself spontaneously without fear of judgment. I would argue it's excellent for creativity and artistic expression. If you're going to write an essay or a story or something like that, or to do a podcast, being able to, I think when I started podcasting, that really forced me to learn, really catalyzed my ability to free associate, because I learned to do exactly what I'm doing now, which is talking without necessarily having a clear plan for where I'm going to go, but just allowing myself to express myself. So I think it's an extremely valuable skill, but one of the things you can learn from it is definitely to get to know yourself. I think one of the problems that people have is, just like we have a blind spot behind our heads, which we can't actually perceive. We don't perceive a blind spot. We don't perceive just how much we don't know ourselves. We very rarely have spaces for introspection, like therapy and things like that. And so I think people have a huge self-awareness problem. And I should add, you don't need to be in therapy to free associate. So you can do it, you should do it in therapy if you're in therapy, but you can also free associate by journaling. So literally let your hand guide itself across the page without needing to make sense, again, without it needing to be rational. You could speak into your phone and record yourself into your phone, just expressing yourself, and you would be surprised. It's like having one of those conversations where, when you have those conversations where you think, wow, I didn't even know I thought that, and now that I've said it, I guess I realize I do. And those are the conversations we love the most, and these are the conversations, I would argue, you can have with yourself if you choose to do those kinds of activities.
hmm I love the journaling idea. I remember growing up, we had the old show Star Trek The Next Generation, and Captain Picard would give his captain's log and he would speak and he would actually free associate. So you'd hear the character free associating and forming ideas and forming communications about his
Yeah.
thoughts. That's a very masculine way, the captain's log. You can even
Mm.
call it that. but you
Hmm.
can free associate and discover how you feel and actually come to realizations because you're taking the right side emotional brain and putting it through the logical left side, the language centers of the brain, and pushing them out into language as you're creating this journal entry. That's a great way to logically process your unconscious brain. And just like you said, oh, that's what I think. Oh, that's how I feel. Oh, that's why I do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's an amazing skill that applies to so many situations, and it really underscores what a mysterious process creativity is, and just how complex our minds are. Uh, as we go through life, just so many things happen to us, and we're taking in so much data all the time without realizing it. And that data is having a very real impact about, what you think, how you think about yourself, what you think about your own capabilities, what you think about other people and what other people can do or cannot do for you, whether the world is a land of opportunity versus a land of obstacles. So all of these things, we're making judgments about all of these things all the time. And what I find is that if it goes unexamined, then people can have very, very dysfunctional unconscious beliefs, such as, the world is just full of obstacles and I'm never going to be able to get ahead. Or
No one will
yeah.
ever love me, or no one is worthy of my trust. People will always hurt me. I am never going to be good enough. Someone will always abandon me. Someone not texting me back means they don't love me anymore. Yeah, there are a lot of these behavioral conditionings.
Mm.
One thing that I love that you said is that the behavior served a purpose. B.F. Skinner said the organism is always right. Whatever the organism does, it's serving a purpose. And that's a fascinating thing I learned from my schooling, and I'd love to get your take on this. One of the best questions you can ask an addict is, what is good about your drug? What is excellent about that drug that you use? Why do you love it? What does it do for you? What benefit do you get from it? Because everybody else on the planet is yelling at them about the drug they're using. Even they're yelling at themselves. They hate themselves for it. Everybody's mad at them. Be the one person asking them what's the benefit, because then they can sit down and logically think about it and they can describe it. They can tell you this is the benefit. And you say, okay, well, that's awesome. That's actually sounds really great. Almost makes me want to run out and use it. But what are the side effects? What are the drawbacks? What are the pieces you don't like? Let's stack up the pros and cons objectively. And as you do, they begin to say, well, these are the benefits, but this is the cost I'm paying. Okay. Then you say, what if there's another way to meet that exact need in a better way without those consequences? What if we can do that? And you can begin restructuring the unconscious desire to fulfill that need with a healthier conscious desire that's going to be much better met. What do you think of that pattern?
I mean, I 100% agree with you. So I have and do work with people with alcohol and drug issues. I've worked in an addiction clinic before. And I think the number one problem I saw there was that the patient and the clinic alike, they put all the attention on the drug or alcohol and stopping it, and none of the attention or effort on what the hell is my life going to look like post alcohol or post heroin or post crack cocaine. And that's why I also ask that question every single time. What does alcohol do for you? What is the attraction? What does this drug do for you? Because that question, the answer to that question informs what am I going to need in my life post alcohol or post drugs. So someone might say alcohol helps me deal with my negative emotions, as I mentioned before. So, okay, you have a negative emotion problem and we have to figure out how to deal with it. But it can be lots of reasons. So someone might drink because it numbs their disappointments about their life, so they might have to deal with regrets, for instance. Or drugs may help them alleviate boredom. A lot of people want adventure in their life and they don't feel like they can get it, and drugs are an easy way to get a feeling of a kind of adventure. Okay, you need to live an adventurous life, and this can contradict some aspects of, for example, alcohol and Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, where in AA they often talk about an idea of temperance, that you're supposed to live quite a calm existence, not too many emotional ups and downs. But I would argue, I think that can work well for a lot of people.
Mm.
But I would argue if you're someone who needs adventure, maybe you need a few ups and downs and you need to find a way to get it without alcohol. So, yes, I think it's an absolutely crucial question. I think one of the biggest disservices we can do to someone with an addiction problem is to just deal with the addiction itself. And this is really a trend we're starting to see in all of mental health, is just dealing with the mental health issue itself, as opposed to all the other stuff that's happening underneath in the person's life, in their past. It's so difficult to form a good recovery plan, management plan with someone if you're not taking into account the whole person, their past, their present. You're really just left dealing with surface level problems. And if you just deal with it that way, you just get surface level solutions, ultimately, I feel.
I love this. That's exactly what led me into the field of working more purely on attachment, was because nobody wanted to address here in America the underlying causes of mental health problems, of families
Right.
breaking up, of addictions. You have to talk about the human elements that are underlying that and what you've learned, the trauma responses, the unconscious pieces. And I have found that as people become more aware of even just that attachment exists, as they become more aware of their own unconscious behaviors and become conscious of, oh, I'm avoidant. Oh, I have these tendencies. Oh, this is unfortunate. I should probably not do this. It starts to ruin the fun of
Mm.
being avoidant for them. So they start pausing in the moment. They have a different conversation. They say something. They hold on a moment longer and don't jump out the window. If they're anxiously attached, they start telling people what their fears are, or they start saying, hey, did I upset you? Instead of assuming they've upset them and then jumping straight to self martyrdom. Did I upset you? If so, what happened and how can I make up for it? And oh, I didn't. Well, good. That's a relief to hear. Thank you. And resolving that fear. So the unconscious becomes so conscious. We've talked a little bit about free association. We've talked a little bit about questioning the behaviors and questioning the benefits of what you're doing. What would you say, and what do you advise people when they want to become more intentional with their relationship behaviors in particular? What are some opening steps that you help guide them through?
Right. So I love the subject of behavior change. And as much as I love psychotherapy, which is a general slower process of helping someone develop their self-awareness and their unconscious patterns, etc., can be a little slow, very rewarding, but slow. I love working with people as well for shorter periods of time to be like, how can we change this behavior and get you the kind of results that you want? Now, I think the problem with behavior change is most people, they kind of impulsively arrive at the behavior they want to change, usually around New Year's Eve, and they think, I want to stop drinking. That's kind of the impulse. They don't think about it very deeply. They don't think about why they might want to stop drinking or what are the externalities of their drinking. They don't make a plan. They don't really set a very clear intention. They don't measure the results. They don't use emotional leverage, be it positive or negative. And then as soon as they fail on some level, like they have a drink, let's say 2 weeks into January, they think, right, I've failed. Clearly, this is a problem I can't shake right now. Going back to drinking is a lot easier. So I would argue the way you approach, there are simple steps you can take to behavior change that's going to dramatically improve the chances of your success. And I think these are, one, thinking about actually what you want seriously. Like, okay, you want to stop drinking alcohol, or you want to communicate better with your partner. Why exactly do you want to do that? What is the underlying motivation? Indeed, what you could say is the inspiration. And you can even get someone to work on this actively. You can say, okay, if you do this desired behavior, if you communicate better with your partner, what would your marriage look like in 10 years? You can also say, what would your marriage look like in 10 years if you don't act on this, if you don't work on your communication? And that can provide a lot of initial inspiration. If you're clear on what you want and your intention, then you have to make a plan. Like, what series of actions am I going to take? And the crucial thing here is it does not have to be a perfect plan. So another mistake people make, if they do make a plan, they feel like it has to be perfect. This often results in people procrastinating because they feel like my plan isn't perfect, therefore I can't start. But no, you need to make a hypothetical plan. And that could be, I'm going to set aside 45 minutes every week to speak to my partner, hopefully as an attachment specialist. Do you agree with that kind of advice?
We need to be
And
setting time aside and being intentional, yes, in our
yeah,
relationships.
then you execute your plan. You might use positive and negative emotional leverage. So that might be telling your friends about what you're doing, like telling your friends, oh, I'm going to stop drinking, so just hold me accountable. That's negative leverage. So you're using negative emotions to kind of push you along. And you can use positive leverage as well by, for example, using that sense of like, what am I going to achieve if I manage to do this for a long period of time, or rewarding yourself in different ways. You can say, I'm going to set aside the money I would spend on alcohol. I'm going to set that aside and spend it on something I really like instead. So you're using negative emotions to push you, you're using positive emotions to pull you. You go about your plan, and then, and this is crucial, you need to measure your results. Like, what actually are your results?
Mm.
If you're trying to stop drinking, you need to think, okay, how many drinks have I had over the past 2 weeks? A lot of people, a lot of big mistake that people make when they try and quit drinking is they only count sort of the absolute number of drinks they've had in a given day. So let's say they quit drinking for 2 weeks and then they have a drink and they think, oh, I failed because I had a drink. Well, no, actually, in a 2 week period, you just had one drink, whereas before in a 2 week period, you had 10 drinks. So actually, you've made a huge improvement. If you were a company or a corporation, this would be classed as huge revenue gains. You did a really good job. So measuring your results is very important, but then how you measure your results to maximize your motivation. And any negative results you get, like if things don't quite work, that you want to emotionally detach from and don't take it too seriously. The purpose of negative results, say if you have that one drink or you end up having an argument with your partner, say, is to allow you to reflect, okay, maybe there's something about my plan that I need to revise. And so this is where reflexivity comes in. If you get a negative result, that has to inform your plan in some way. So I've gotten some sort of negative result. Let's go back to the drawing board, maybe not change my plan entirely, but at least think, okay, what about this? What information am I getting from this negative result? And if you open your eyes to this, there's a huge amount of information you can get just by looking.
Mm.
And then the last thing before I stop is I'll say you need to keep your eye out for like deeper psychological blocks and identity level, like blocks to identity level change. So again, if you're dealing with a relationship issue, it might be that you have an anxious or an avoidant attachment style, and you might need more help or more assistance to work through that. You might have self-sabotaging tendencies. You might have success barriers. You may identify too closely with your bad habits. So if you smoke cigarettes, say, you may on some level identify as someone who's a bit reckless, who's a little bit self-destructive, who colors outside the lines a little bit. So as you're going about this process, trust me, if you have those blocks or those identity level problems, they will come up. And you want to keep an eye on that using like the kind of free associative processes we talked about earlier, and then start to work on those directly and think, why do I have those blocks? Why do I identify so closely with my habit? And then it's just a question of repetition, repeat those cycles, and that's going to vastly improve your chances of success, I think.
And to that, I will add that a lot of times when we want to change our behaviors, we only consider going inward and using the resources we have, trying to make ourselves change. I will change, I will change, I will change. So many of us forget that there are people around us who can and should assist us, that we are social mammals, that we usually adapt our behaviors to other people. So the idea of changing completely self-isolated is a little bit foreign to us as well. Accountability is overwhelmingly important. They find that having social accountability is one of the biggest indicators of diet success or workout success and losing weight as well. Yes, there's mental factors, there's all kinds of personal things, but incorporating your family and friends as they check in on you, even incorporating maybe your rivals, people who will pick on you just slightly, that can help too. This is men in particular benefit from a little more pushy, a little more aggressive services. We make fun of each other. This is one reason men josh and poke and scrape at each other a little bit, is to drive ourselves to do better. Women benefit typically from more the warmth and encouragement and I believe in you sort of affirmations. But having that element built in, the better your relationships are, the better you can begin to make these changes. Even if it's one person, a therapist, a coach, a medical professional, a religious figure, a mentor, a friend, an uncle, an aunt, somebody that you can talk to and state your goal and plant your flag and declare that you will change it. It makes all the difference in the world. I know that it also takes some time to rebuild some of these behaviors. I think of, you mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous and their programs. A lot of people love them. Some people don't agree with them. I think that their method at the time was genius. I don't fully agree with a complete lifestyle of abstinence forever for every person, but there's
Mm,
also people who need that as well. So it's not a one size fits all, but it's a one size fits many. And their pieces are quite wonderful. Some of them, in particular, one thing I love about them is that they have singled out that it takes about 90 days to begin unconditioning a bad behavior and belief. Bad meaning more harmful than good. As you get away from the habitual behaviors and get away from the habits, yes, but as you get away from using it as a stress reliever, and as you fully reprogram into alternate replacement behaviors, you get that 90-day, that 100-day token in AA for being sober, because not only have you stopped drinking, you have probably by then built a new behavior pattern for your stress relief. And that's great. And that's why I structured my attachment repair programs that way. Is the first sequence is 90 days. It's 3 months of uncondition your unhealthy patterns and enter a new phase. But one thing that's important that people forget for that pattern is you don't stop there. You don't say, okay, woo, everything's changed. Everything's wonderful. I never have to stress or think again. Is the second phase of now really entrenching that new behavior and really
mm,
holding to it and exploring what available opportunities are there. So many of my clients, my couples, when they come into me, they do like an 8 session package. And by session 6 or 7, they're feeling pretty good because they've resolved some issues. They're feeling great. And they say, Adam, I don't even know what to talk about today. We haven't even had a fight in 2 weeks. And I say, why is that your baseline? We're not fighting is not great.
mm,
We're
mhm,
not fighting
mhm,
is not being happy. We're not fighting is not flourishing. That's just the
mm,
absence of agony. So the
mhm.
second phase needs to be what opportunities were available to us that have never been there before. What are your thoughts on this timeline? What are your thoughts on reprogramming now into a full sequence of amazing behaviors?
I agree with the timeline. I usually tell people weeks or months. If you're going to do anything serious, usually if people are starting a work project or looking for a new job or anything serious that people go about in their life, building muscles, say, or changing their body, they'll give themselves weeks or months. And so I think we should certainly. I think for some reason, when it comes to psychological things, we think we can make it an instant transformation. And I do think we can have moments of clarity instantly. We can have certain epiphanies, but really for things to last and to really construct a new psychological life for yourself, I think weeks and months. And I'm glad you mentioned the idea of opportunity. I think that's extremely important. Similar to what we talked about before in terms of people recovering from addiction, you know, w- it's an idea I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment is the idea of opportunity cost. And personally, I've had my own journey with alcohol. I've never really had a problematic relationship with alcohol. I used to drink socially, but I've been sober for a while now. And one of the things that keeps me that way and really stops me from going back quite easily, I don't feel like I have to exert a lot of self-control, is the idea of opportunity cost. If you if you are drinking alcohol regularly, what does that prevent you from doing? If you stop drinking alcohol, what do you get to do instead? And alcohol is an easy one because, frankly, alcohol is a poison. It's not like you saying it's a poison is not a hyperbolic. From a medical biological standpoint, alcohol is a neurotoxin. It is for whatever reason. I think some good reasons and perhaps some less good reasons. It's a poison that our society endorses and we consume it en masse. It's certainly normalized. It's not stigmatized as other drugs are. But that's what it is. And when you poison yourself, given the fact that your mind is the lens through which you solve all your problems, you can appreciate the most happiness and the most profundity and have some of the really, most sublime moments of your life. But your mind is also the tool that can get you to improve your life in different ways. For me, that's the thing that really makes not drinking alcohol quite easy for me because now I've kind of hypnotized myself to think every time I'm going to drink, I immediately think about feeling hungover and what feeling hungover will prevent me from doing, like to prevent me from doing that activity I really want to do or working on my business or spending quality time with my partner or things like that. Um, so I think that's how we should frame all of these things, recovering from attachment. If you have an attachment issue, yeah, it causes problems, fights, arguments, etc. But what are you missing out on? You're missing out on a wonderful, nourishing relationship. You're ultimately missing out on the wonderful life you could get to live as a result of that relationship. I study humanistic psychotherapy, and one of the things I love about it, in contrast to psychoanalysis, although I love psychoanalysis as well, is that humanistic philosophy, humanistic psychology also focuses on, like, what does real mental well-being look like? Like, if you are mentally healthy, yeah, you don't have as many problems, but what are the amazing things you can do? What is it like to live a self-actualized existence? Like, actually caring about something and then bringing that value into reality. Like, you, Adam, you're a great example of this. You care about attachment, you care about helping people. You've actualized that in such a real way, in a way that helps so many people. That's not easy to do. You need to be mentally healthy to be able to do that. That's like the baseline conditions, but look what you've managed to achieve building on that. So absolutely, I think flourishing is something that we should be building in to helping people with their mental health problems at the earliest possible stages, in my view. Because again, it's that positive leverage that people can feel a pull towards.
Mm. I'm thinking, I had a couple just this morning that I was coaching, and I've been working with them for a while. And when they came in, they were both so tight and tense and dysregulated, and they couldn't have even a basic conversation. And everything was a fight for them, and they weren't sure they should stay married. And now, through a few sessions and some work that we've done over a couple of weeks and months, they've got so much better that they're able to be at peace with each other, have good conversations. And they came in today and said, we're still having a hard time. We're still disagreeing on how to parent. And it's really tough because we can't come to an agreement. And then we fight about it. And I said, it's a bit like when you have two bones and they're like this. They're not supposed to be bone on bone. They're supposed to be cartilage. And when there's cartilage, your
Mm,
joint works amazing. But when you come in and you're fighting all the time, it's bone grinding on bone and it's agony and it's everything hurts and you can't do anything. That joint is almost useless. As you start doing the improvement, you start having
mm,
cartilage and then you have a reduction in pain. The joint can move. So you can get up, you can walk around, you can live your daily life. But what so many people miss is when you have that cartilage back in that joint, you just don't get up, walk from your seat to the refrigerator, walk back and sit down again. It's not just daily life. It's how would you like to go hiking? How would you like to go running and exploring?
mm,
What would you like to go do? Do you want to go do yoga? Do you want to go play tennis? Do you want to go play outside and take a long walk? Do you want to go sightseeing and walk around a city you've never been to before? What are the opportunities once you have grown that cartilage and your joint is working again? Daily life, cool, but what amazing opportunities are out there in a relationship? Once you are not grinding bone on bone, mad at each other all the time, okay, you're still working through some of the conversations as a couple, but now you can get through daily life. You can get through your parenting disagreements. You can get through your relationship disagreements, taking space, doing dates, how much time you spend together, how you resolve conflicts. You could do that, but then what next? What can you attack in life together? What can you grow and build together as a couple? What kind of family can you build? What joy can you find? What pleasure?
mm,
What intimacy? The opportunities are the pieces that people, they have no idea about. It's if you grew up in such dirt poor conditions, you could barely afford food. If someone hands you $1 billion, you don't know what to do with it. You shove it all in your mattress and sleep on it so no one steals
mm,
it. And then you keep eating the same low quality food to just keep you alive.
mm,
You need someone to come train you and say, this is the opportunity. Now that you have all this
mm.
wealth, this is what you can do. And that is the exciting next piece that you can help people with.
Absolutely, and I think that it repeats itself, because once you get a taste of flourishing, and once you know what that's like, when bad things happen in the future, and of course they will, once you kind of know what you're striving towards, you can sustain that suffering a lot more easily, I think, which is, this is the Nietzsche quote: he who has a why can bear any how. So once you have anchored in that, okay, this is my For someone, it might be, what Robert Greene, the author, calls discovering their life task. Once you discover your life task, then when suffering comes back into the picture in future, because bad things happen and life is full of ups and downs, it's much easier because you have a set of values, I think, that you can anchor yourself towards. And I think one of the reasons so many people suffer is because they don't really have any values. In fact, I think this really a modern problem since the decline of major religious institutions, which used to be the things people used to go to get some sense of what should I value in life. Not that hasn't been replaced by anything. It's really we live in a society that, in many ways, is like quite hedonistic, quite superficial. And don't get me wrong, I like to have fun, but if you don't have an anchor in those values, it's very hard to be mentally healthy, I think, because you don't have something to strive for. And what you end up doing usually is you end up striving for values that have been implanted in you by someone else, and those could be like your parents' values, perhaps, or the values that the media around you has implanted into you. So usually, if I'm working with someone, for example, in psychotherapy, there usually be some discussion of, hey, when push comes to shove, what do you actually care about, before we move on to concrete goals, which might be more a feature of behavior change coaching. um, what do you actually care about? What's important to you? Because the answer will be slightly different from person to person. And whether you're conscious of it or not, you do care about something. Now, again, it might be not originally your values, but you care about something, and your behavior will be a reflection of that. So I do think having an anchor in that flourishing is really, really important.
I agree with that. You will believe in something. There's not nothing, but what do you believe in? Start with almost anything. It's better
Mm,
than responding to your fear. It's also important, it is so crucial to know that there is something beyond just suffering in your life, because if
mm,
all you've known is suffering and then the reduction of suffering and then more suffering and the reduction of suffering, if you've never known true joy, true
mm,
connection, true intimacy, true real life that's thriving and opportunity focused, if all you think that your best option is to have slightly less pain one day than the next day,
mm,
then it does not inspire much incentive to go on or even to take many more steps. You're going to try to
mm,
conserve every ounce of energy you have. So if you can push through and find that opportunity and find that joy in your connections and your relationships and better attachment, you have so much more incentive to strive forward and then make permanent, lasting changes, because you
mm,
know that better is right around the corner. And that
mm.
changes everything. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and similarly on this point, are you familiar with the work of Irving Yalom, the existential psychotherapist?
A little bit, but not as much as I could be. Tell me a little more.
Yeah, so I really like thinking about existential philosophy when it comes to psychotherapy. And obviously that's thinking about, our lives in a big picture sense, about death, mortality, our limitations, etc. And if you work in mental health, you encounter quite frequently people who have death anxiety, worries about that they're going to die, or sometimes medical anxiety, like they might feel an ache or a pain and think, oh, I have cancer, or something like that. I'm sure you've encountered that a lot. And I was thinking about this for a long time. And this author, Irving Yalom, he's an existential psychotherapist, originally a psychiatrist as well, I believe. And he has this amazing idea, which is he felt the amount of death anxiety someone feels is proportionate to how much they feel their life has gone unlived up until that point, by which he means how much they haven't engaged with their lives, how much they haven't really thought, what do I care about, and whatever that is, how can I bring that into my life, actualize it into my life. The less you do that, the more likely you are to be anxious about your death. And maybe this seems like a strange idea up front, but I think on examination it makes perfect sense, because we have this limited life, this opportunity. The less we make use of that opportunity, of course, the more anxious we're going to be about its end. It's coming, and we haven't done anything with it. Whereas, I would say in my personal experience, but this is also, I think, corroborated by studies that people have done about people's deathbed regrets. if people try, if they really try, if they really think, what do I care about and how can I move towards that? Even if they fail, they're going to have a lot less death anxiety because they feel, you know what, or successes and failures aside, I gave it my best shot. And I think that this is a very powerful idea. So I think one of the things that can really ground you and help you be more mentally healthy is the sense that, am I giving my life my best shot or not? I think that's a very important question one could ask themselves.
Right back to being intentional and conscious about the way that you are living your life. I
Mm.
think that's an important distinction that brings a lot of people into healthier relationships, healthier attachment, healthy self. I think it's absolutely crucial. Alex, thank you for
Mm.
this conversation here today. Everybody at home, I hope that this has been helpful and that you are diving a little bit deeper into why you are doing what you're doing. Go back and listen to the suggestions we gave here today. Do a few of them, do some free association writing. Alex, for everybody at home who wants to listen to your podcast and wants to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. So, you can check out the Thinking Mind podcast. That's a podcast all about psychiatry, psychotherapy, self development, all the stuff we've talked about today. That's on Spotify, Apple, all the major podcast platforms. We have a Thinking Mind podcast YouTube channel. And on Instagram, we're at Thinking Mind Podcast, and on X at Thinking Mind Pod.
And you can see me on there twice now, right?
Yeah, so we just put out our second episode with Adam last week. The audio is out, the YouTube version is coming out soon, and that was also a very interesting conversation.
Everything we've talked about so far has been. Everybody, thank you so much at home. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, drop your questions down below. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for being here.